Cumberland traffic, tow 4041, uniform departing 11, glider and tow.
Welcome to Soaring the Sky, a glider pilots podcast. Hello, my name is Chuck. I'll be your host. This is episode 34. This episode is brought to you by Arizona Soaring Incorporated, the nation's largest provider of professional glider training. Since 1969, they provided training from initial private through CFI glider and entry level through advanced aerobatics. Open year-round, 7 days a week. More information is available at azsoaring.com. Our guest today on the podcast was interested in aviation from an early age. He first soloed in a helicopter at age 20 while an Army ROTC cadet at the College of William and Mary. He then spent 7 years in a variety of aviation-related roles on active duty in the Army and the Army National Guard, accumulating 800 flight hours in the OH-58 and the UH-1 aircraft. After a 23-year hiatus from a business career, he returned to flying by getting his private pilot glider add-on at Ridge Soaring in Julian, PA in 2015. Since then, he has accumulated 750 glider hours, mainly in his private ship, a 1994 DG-800A self-launcher. He has been president of the Pittsburgh Soaring Association since 2016. His FAA certificate reads Commercial Pilot Rotary and Glider Instrument Pilot Rotary and CFIG. Join us now as we hear David Hart's story on Soaring the Sky. David Hart, welcome to Soaring the Sky. Great to have you tonight. How are you?
Hi, it's my pleasure. So happy to be here, Chuck.
So you are flying in the Pittsburgh area.
I live in Pittsburgh, but I fly where I can find the best lift at a reasonable, travel.
Absolutely, yeah. So where are you soaring?
Well, I would say probably most of my soaring has been in Pennsylvania and in West Virginia, Virginia, up and down the Appalachian ridges, or Appalachian ridges, depending on how you want to say that.
Well,
but I've also flown out west. But most of my time, that's been more like a safari kind of thing. But my steady go-to is the ridges and the wave and the thermal flying from Williamsport, Pennsylvania, down to, as far as, not that I've gotten there, but as far as Nashville, or rather Knoxville, Tennessee, which is 500 miles. And up and down those mountains is kind of a playground for gliders, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and one of the best soaring destinations on the planet. In fact, location of several world records.
If I could back up a little bit, when did all this get started for you as far as your aviation adventure?
Well, for me, I was interested at a young age, like 4, in aviation. I was fortunate to fly on airplanes at that time, I think mainly large, like commercial airliners, but at a young age. And so looking out the window, you get the sense that you're flying, and it's kind of, you get it. And I was like, wow, that was great. And then around age, I would say 7, I got my first ride in a small airplane where I was, a little more intimately involved with seeing what the pilot was doing, and it's a different feel, it feels different in the air. And that was probably age 7, and I was, enchanted by that. And to both a small airplane, it was probably a Piper, but maybe a 6-seater, and then a helicopter at age 7 that was doing a demo, going up and down to different airports, and I got the chance to get on it and do a 10-minute flight, and boy, that was great. I can still remember it very clearly.
Yeah, helicopters are like a totally different experience. I know that's the way it was for me when I got in a helicopter. So at a young age, that must have been pretty amazing.
Sure. So though I didn't do it every day, I certainly had an interest in aviation from that age, and to be a pilot, right? That was kind of the cool thing. So that was my early interest, but I didn't actually get a pilot's license until I was 21 years old, I think, maybe 22 years old. And that was a military, flight, I guguess, license. I got an FAA license at the same time, a commercial helicopter instrument rating. Because that was my military training being a young lieutenant out of ROTC. So I picked a military career that would get me in a cockpit. That was kind of the reason I did military service. Was an Army helicopter pilot in the 2nd U.S. Cavalry for 4 years in the 1980s. Got out of the service in 1989 and was in the Guard for a couple more years, still flying helicopters. But then, life got in the way, and I stopped for the better part of 20 years and came back in, actually more than 20 years, and came back to soaring, specifically in 2015. I think that's right. And so I've been flying since then, soaring primarily or exclusively.
What brought you from flying helicopters to soaring?
Well, helicopters all fine and good when someone else is paying for it.
Yeah.
It's a very expensive thing to operate and kind of inefficient if you really think about it. It's a specialized thing. If you don't need to hover, you don't need a helicopter. It's a lot of fun, and it's to fly it, and it's a different thing, kind of stick and rudder from in fact, there is no rudder, but, in terms of pilot manipulated controls, it's different than flying a sailplane or a power plane. So it was a bit of an adjustment for me coming back to it after those many years. But the reason I took up soaring also was that this Pennsylvania has done some tourism work, I guess. So from where I live in Pittsburgh, I would hear about the glider operations near State College, which is about a little over 100 miles. So that was pretty close. And when I, finally had the time and the wherewithal, I drove out there and took took my glider lessons, and it went pretty easily. And at the same time, this being around 2015, I got a hold of the Pittsburgh chapter, the Pittsburgh Soaring Association, which is the soaring club, local SSA affiliated soaring club. What
were they flying when you started flying there?
At Pittsburgh, they've had the same fleet pretty much since I've been there, which is an L-23 a Super Blanik, that is a G102 single-seater, 15-meter standard class, and a AC-4 Russia, which is a little one-place, almost an ultralight glider. And then we have a leased 233, which we've leased from Shenandoah Valley Soaring in Virginia. They've been very kind. And that helped us out when the Blanik was in the shop, so that we still have a trainer to, conduct our bread and butter, which is flight training.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Were you flying the 233 then when you started?
No, I flew it with Tom Knopf at Ridge Soaring, where I did all of my basic flight training, primary glider training, and he has a couple of G103s, which are two-seater Grobes, which is a bit of a truck, in my opinion, of a glider. Flies like a truck. That's where I did my primary training, and then I flew the club's Blanik, and I flew the club's Grobe in terms of kind of my progression into single-seaters. And the Russia. I flew both those gliders, and that gave me some experience before I bought my own ship.
And what did you purchase when you decided to go out and buy your own ship?
Well, after an exhaustive analysis that included a scoring algorithm, for performance and price and various other parameters, I finally bought a DG-800A self-launcher, 18 meters.
So you don't have to worry about a tow plane then. You can go to the airport and fly when you want.
I can go to the airport and fly when I want. That's right. When it's running. I think motor gliders are notoriously finicky, particularly the motorized part, which is why, as a cautionary thing, it's famous among motor glider pilots that, the reason motor glider pilots kill themselves sometimes is that they count too much on the iron thermal, and when the iron thermal doesn't work, they're left without options, and so go into the trees or whatever they have to do, because they don't leave themselves a safe landing place at all times, like most reasonable glider pilots would do.
Yeah, it makes sense. So how much time and fuel do you have? Like, let's say you launch and you're in the air. So what would you have left after a launch to maybe get yourself to some more altitude so you could continue to fly?
Well, more than enough. There's in the DG, which I think is fairly similar to other of that class of motor glider, carries 22 liters of fuel in its main tank, and then there's a couple of removable wing tanks which contain another 10 liters each. So the motor burns about 20 liters an hour. So on the main tank alone, you can run it for an hour, and that's a lot. The typical self-launch, in my experience, is anywhere between 2 and 5 minutes of motor running time, maybe 10, like at the extreme outside. So you don't run the motor very long on the average launch, and are left with all that fuel. You can run it for another hour, and since the thing climbs at 8 knots with the motor running, an hour, gives you a lot of climbing. So to get you out of most situations, if the motor lights.
So on a good day, then you're pretty much good to go. You could probably fly all day if you find some good thermals. And
you could, in theory. I mean, my personal practice is to fly as a glider once I've launched, and not to think of the motor as anything but a launching device like a tow plane.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Now, not to say I haven't done like engine saves, but they've always been around, over a field, usually an airfield, which, where I could land if it didn't light.
Yeah, so you pretty much treat it like a glider, just gets you in the air and then go, just like you would if you were towed up.
That's right.
So what has been one of your, I guess, most memorable flights in that glider for you so far?
Wow, there have been a lot of them. Well, would you like to hear my most memorable flight in the East or in the West?
How about you give me the East, and then, if you don't mind, give me one in the West, too.
Okay, I don't mind. In the East, I would say probably my biggest, my most exciting flight was one where I think I went all the way from Lock Haven in the north to at least Mountain Grove in the south. So Lock Haven is about 30 miles, 20 miles short of Williamsport, which is the end of the ridge, the end of the primary ridge in the Appalachian chain. The primary being the first one off the plateau that the wind hits first, and that's the ridge that extends. It's various mountains as you go north and south, but it is the first one off the plateau. So that's the same as the Knobblies down near Cumberland, or New Creek Mountain, or getting further south, South Fork Mountain, North Fork Mountain, all the way down there, and then going up Tussey, Nittany, or not so much Nittany, but Bald Eagle Ridge, Dunning Mountain. They're not in order, but these are Buffalo Mountain. These are all the front ridge. And so that's a very interesting flight. I mean, the reason it's doable faster and further than you could ever go on a thermal flight is because of the ridge lift when the wind is blowing perpendicular. So the ridges are very reliable and very, very strong lift, and you can go super fast and cover a lot of ground. Now, I didn't fly particularly fast this day, but others like Tom Knopf and Carl Streetick and the other heroes of Appalachian soaring have covered the ridge down and back in a single day, which is 1,000 miles. That's 1,600 kilometers, right? Not 1,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
Doing 1,000 kilometers on the ridge is not that hard to do. Truth be told, if you fly out anywhere like Ridge Soaring or Bedford, even Cumberland, if you fly north, all you got to do is go up and back 3 times, and you have over 1,000 kilometers. Up being from Cumberland to, Williamsport, and down being from Williamsport back. That's I don't know how many kilometers, like 150 miles each way. You do that 3 times, and you're over 1,000 kilometers. Now, so that's not my most memorable flight. The most memorable flight is you go from Lock Haven down to Columbia or Williamsport in the north, down to Cumberland. You catch the wave there, or ridge soar the Knobblies, which I don't have the guts to do. But you catch the wave, and then you take the wave down to basically to Petersburg, West Virginia, where the ridges now are stronger again, and you can stay in the wave or get down on the ridge. And the high point of the whole Appalachian chain is right there, Spruce Knob, about 30 miles south of Petersburg, West Virginia. But from Spruce Knob is downhill pretty much all the way to Knoxville. And the first stop down that way is a place called Mountain Grove, which is the end of the ridge. So you can get all the way to Mountain Grove, to Petersburg on a continuous ridge flight. But connecting that with the northern part is the exciting thing. And there was one time I've been able to do it, that I flew out of Bedford, got up in the wave. This was March of probably 2 years ago. Flew out of Bedford, got up in the wave, made it across the wave all the way to Spruce Knob, which is a good long ways, and then down to Mountain Grove, turned, came back, flew the ridge all the way back to Petersburg, which is exciting, especially around Snowy Mountain, which is kind of the crux. Then back into the wave, over to Cumberland, back on the ridge, up and down, all the way to Williamsport and back. That was a big flight. Yeah,
so you're combining wave along with ridge to get that done.
In that case, yes. I mean, if you're Tom Knopf, who was my introduction to gliding, my flight instructor, told me that. I mean, others have. I think several others have ridge soared the Knobblies, but you need to be pretty bold. I think it's a pretty bold strategy, one which I'm not willing to take that risk. So I'll only do it if there's wave.
Because there's a pretty big gap there that gets tricky.
Yeah, pretty much from Cumberland and New Creek Mountain, which is south of Kaiser, if you know where that is.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So New Creek Mountain is the one with the big windmills on it, and if you can get there, there's always lift. But from Cumberland to New Creek Mountain is probably, like I said, you can't. It's not one glide, right? You got to thermal across or get wave across. And on the strong days, thermaling is a challenge because the thermals are going to be broken, because it's blowing pretty good. So wave, I think, is a better bet. It's hit or miss. There's a guy, Tango 8, out of New Hampshire, who's ace pilot, and he's done that flight several times where he, I think out of Mifflin, will get down to near Cumberland, get up in the wave, fly it all the way across, go all the way down to Mountain Grove and back. He's gone further. I think he's gone all the way to Tazewell, Virginia, I think it is. It's pretty far. It's well past Covington. It's another 100 miles past Mountain Grove.
Oh, wow.
But that's still not all the way to Knoxville, right? To get to Knoxville, you got to fly. I don't have my map out, so I can't name all the mountains. That's the part I haven't flown yet. But there are guys that fly out of Knoxville and they fly north, and for them, they get to Covington. That's a pretty long flight, and Covington being, as far south as I've gone, not quite. So my I just described my best flight, which was Williamsport to Mountain Grove. What I want to do is Williamsport all the way down to Tazewell, or even further, all the way down to Knoxville and back, if possible. That's a big undertaking, and only a few people have ever done it. John Good has done it too, as I mentioned, Streetic and Tom Knopf, and I think a couple others.
How many hours would that be if you want to get to Knoxville?
It's a good 12-hour flight.
Yeah, wow.
It depends if you're booking. I mean, you have to start at the crack of dawn someday in May or June, or May, most likely, April or May. Start at the crack of dawn. I think Brian, the guy who did it out of Petersburg, or from Petersburg, he had to land in the Milesburg Gap. If you know, he flew out of Ridge Soaring for this particular flight, and he flew all the way down to Tazewell, Virginia, and then back. And it got to be so late that on his last leg, he had to land out in the Milesburg Gap, which is just short of Ridge Soaring, rather than fly after dark.
It's so close, right?
Well, he still had his flight. I mean, the flight was what it was.
Yeah, it's still pretty awesome flight. Yeah, exactly.
Pretty awesome.
What was your best flight in the West?
Well, I would say not by the numbers in terms of distance, but kind of a dream flight of mine was the day I flew out of. Actually, I knew that I took my logbook out. So let me actually look at this flight. Yeah. Okay. Here we are. This was on June 30th, 2018, out of Montrose, Colorado. Montrose is about, I don't know, 50 miles south of Grand Junction, so kind of the southwestern part of the state.
Okay.
And Colorado is amazing soaring, amazing, but not for the faint of heart, because the mountains are very high, right, and they get in the way.
Yeah.
So you have to actually plan around the mountains when you're doing high thermal soaring in Colorado, which is unlike any place, almost any other place you do thermal soaring. I don't know, maybe the Alps, but Colorado is definitely big mountains, and so you think twice about crossing a range and so forth. Anyway, at least for me, this was my first time there, and so it was a learning experience. This is my first trip out west, by the way, this one in 2018. But this flight in Montrose was a group of us who had been flying in Parowan, Utah, which is also amazing and highly recommended. A couple of us took off after the Parowan camp, and we came back through Montrose as part of our little safari. So we launched out of Montrose, and what's nice about it, about that particular area, is there's very high mountains just to the south, the San Juan Mountains, the town of Telluride, which is a spectacular place. It's these amazing sheer mountains in this deep valley where the town is, an old mining town. And so it's very, very scenic, and there's amazing in every direction from Montrose. There is some interesting thing. To the south, there's this, the San Juans. To the north is the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, which is this amazing deep black canyon, which is very dramatic to fly over, and it's on the final glide back to Montrose from the north. Very easy to see it. And then there are further mountains to the north and to the east, very tall mountains. Montrose is on the west side of the Continental Divide, so it's going uphill when you go east from there. And if you go west, then you go into the canyonlands of Utah, Moab, that area. So in every direction from Montrose, there's beautiful scenic things. And this was my first and only flight there. I was having some difficulty with my motor in the DG800, which was a loosening drive belt. This drive belt was getting worn, and there's slack in it between the motor and the propeller, and that's something that caused vibration. It's really not something you want to overdo. Have the drive belt break, say, that could be not catastrophic, but highly inconvenient. In flight, you might overspeed your motor. Anyway, I didn't want to run the motor too much. I launched, I shut the motor down out of Montrose at a fairly low altitude, hunted for thermal, couldn't find it. Was gliding back to Montrose, decided to light the motor again, and it started the second time, climbed out, found another thermal, shut the motor down. This time it took, and took that thermal up pretty high and went north, cruising north towards Grand Junction. It was beautiful, high altitude, clouds. It was probably noon, and then up towards Grand Junction, took a right turn towards Aspen, that area, and flew in that direction. These gorgeous mountains. There's something called Grand Mesa there. Very scenic. The clouds were spectacular. Flew back south to Montrose, over the Black Canyon. Had a low save right near the city, but scratched it up. And there's a ridge, very prominent ridge, just to the east of Montrose. You see it from the city. It's very tall, towering cliffs. I don't know, jumps up several thousand feet from the city or the town of Montrose. Headed over there, there were clear markers of lift on the face of that. The prevailing westerly wind was hitting that west-facing mountain and causing very strong thermals, especially in the afternoon when the sun was hitting it. It was marked by cumulus clouds above it, so it was clearly going to be working, and you could see it from miles off. And so I did a glide to that. Sure enough, the thermal hit, like super strong, amazing, 15 knots, some crazy thing for minutes. Wow. And I jumped up 10,000 feet or something like that, up to the height of 18,000 to the limit, and then took a nice cruise from basically Montrose south over the San Juans to Ouray to Telluride, and then from there west still over the mountains, like out towards the Utah desert. Amazing, just beautiful. Particularly interesting to me because I had driven through that very area the year before, on vacation and kind of taking my time. I'd seen the mountains and the towns, all these different towns, and stopped at the Black Canyon and all of that stuff, and said to myself the year before, now wouldn't it be nice to come back and soar these mountains? I can see how that would be great over there and so forth. And sure enough, the next year I was able to come back and make it happen and fly that kind of imaginary flight that I'd had the year before. And that's why that was the most satisfying thing, because it was not only a beautiful place, but it was like a dream realized to have that flight.
Yeah, you got to see it from both point of views, the drive and then up above everything. Wow, that must have been crazy.
Yeah, it was really, it's funny. I had a friend who asked me, I took him flying, and he said, do you think things look different from the air? That is, is the earth different when you're flying as opposed to when you're on the ground? Do you have a new sense of what the world really is when you're flying as opposed to when you're, stuck down in the mud? And
yeah.
I think that the earth is what it is. That is, it doesn't change based on your observation of it necessarily. But I think you have a different appreciation for what there is when you see it from an altitude. Particularly, how the land lays down. I think when you're in the air, the land seems flatter than it does when you're on the ground. That when you're on the ground, you can see elevation much better. That is, changes like a hill. You can climb a hill. You can feel it. From the air, once you get above a certain altitude, you can't really see that hill. So I think it's a little different. Certainly, I like to look at it from the air.
Yeah. It seems like everything slows down for me, too. Obviously, I mean, the traffic below, if you're going over an interstate, the traffic slows down. Everything just slows down. And I don't know, just a peace kind of comes over you. And that's just kind of what I feel when I'm in the air.
Yeah, clouds add to the effect, especially like little wispy ones that you can fly through.
Yeah, true.
I think it's nice to having, not that I don't like a blue day now and then, but clouds add to the appeal.
So that's some pretty amazing flights, and getting the difference between the East and the West. I've only flown here in the East, but I've heard so many amazing stories from the West too. I can't wait to get out there and do some flying too, and just some beautiful country. I mean, beautiful country here too. It's just different out there. And I know a lot of people have told me that, of course, the cloud bases are higher, the thermals are stronger, the mountains are bigger. Everything's just, it's the West, so everything's bigger.
I highly recommend it. And you just have to be mindful, and you can do it safely.
Did you fly with some other people before you took on the task yourself?
What do you mean?
As far as like when you went out west, did you fly with anyone else before you flew it by yourself?
No, I took my own ship out and I flew it. I self-launched. The altitude is the main issue that you have out west as far as the safety of flight, I would say. Once you're up in the air, it's no different. It's just when you're 6,000 feet high. The density altitude keeps you, you don't lift as well.
Right. Yeah. Correct.
So you need a longer ground run, basically. That's the only thing you notice. You don't notice it when you land. And I don't think so.
So as far as your future goes, David, do you have any contest soaring in sight, or what are your goals in the glider?
Well, I just got my CFIG rating about a month ago.
Congratulations.
So I think there will be more instruction in my future.
We definitely need more instructors.
Right. So I'm one of the two staff instructors at the Pittsburgh Soaring Association.
Oh, very cool.
Now, but in addition, right now, I suppose I have short-term and then medium-term soaring goals. I'm pretty active on the OLC. So when I fly OLC type flights. That is, 6 legs. So a 6-leg flight. In that kind of format, last couple years, at least last year, I was like OLC champion in a couple regions, in I think region 4 and region 2, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, very cool.
So I'll try to keep that up. And that just means getting enough flights in. You have to get 6 flights, basically. Six, well, that's how it's scored. You get six. They take the top 6 flights. You can fly more than that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I hope to keep that up. We'll see. Sometimes life gets in the way.
Yeah, true.
Uh,
I just kind of used the OLC as kind of a diary for me because I'm nowhere near getting any kind of points to win any regions, but maybe someday.
Well, I would say that my success there is not due to any great skill on my part. Any competent glider pilot could do it, but rather than it's been the object of some focus for me. And with the self-launcher, I'm able to fly out of sites that other pilots can't. And so that makes the whole thing easier. That I can, ridge soaring shuts down in I don't know, December, January, and February, but I could still fly those months. For instance, there are several record opportunities. I think state record opportunities. I don't think I could probably compete for a national record at this point, particularly not with my glider, which is in the open class. By no means the most powerful of open class gliders. In certain states, and I wrote an article about this for the SSA magazine, there are state records that are achievable, and so there are a few state records I'd like to do. Probably, I don't know, West Virginia. I don't think I could do a Pennsylvania record. Those have all been pretty much taken. Virginia, West Virginia, either one of those could probably set some records. So that may be something I do, or at least think about. As far as contests, I'll tell you the thing about contests in my mind. I love contests, and the people who fly them and win them are highly skilled and amazing pilots. And they can fly circles around me any day of the week. And I won't name them, but they're the ones that win the contests. Not that I don't hope to achieve that. I loved going to contests and I love competing with those guys and learning from them and seeing what they do, and particularly around how do you fly in weak conditions, or in any conditions, but particularly weak conditions, and how do you maximize the lift that's given to you, and make the most of lift lines and that kind of thing, and be efficient, right? Turn as little as possible, thermal as little as possible. That's how you achieve the best speeds. And so that kind of flying is super cool. And so I do like contests. I would tell you that the thing about contests that disturbs me, it's just that in contests they'll fly no matter what the weather is. That is, it could be a strong day, it could be a relatively weak day. If you can get up and stay up in the air, they'll at least they'll launch you and send you out on task. And sometimes those are, that can be a carnage, right? Everybody lands out, which is not, necessarily bad, but, it's inconvenient. And landing out pretty much ruins your contest. That is, anybody who doesn't land out or who manages to get around or get part of the course without landing out is going to have a big advantage. And, usually an unsurmountable advantage in a contest. It's hard to land out ever and make the podium. So, but that's all fine. And I'll do more contests. I haven't done many this year. A couple years ago I did, I don't know, like 7 or 8. But the thing that I wanted to come back to there, that for someone who doesn't fly every day, I think a good safety rule of thumb, at least one that I try to keep to, is that I try to fly when the weather is the strongest, right? I want to fly only in the strongest days. Okay. And then I want to fly every one of them. So that's my strategy. And then it's not a matter, there's never any risk of landing out. There's never any risk of, having a weak day. You have the chance of really doing something safely, usually, right? Because you have reliable lift on a strong day.
Yeah. And that was actually my next question I was going to ask you, is any advice you had for other pilots or even obviously student pilots, how to be a safer pilot. And that's some good advice. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. My other advice to every aspiring glider pilot is, Tom Knopf and others have done analysis of accidents, glider accidents. The SSA does it as well. And you can see what kills people pretty easily. But you can also see accidents that don't kill people. There's a very useful accident website. I think it's called the Aircraft Accident of the Day on Facebook. You should check it out. And every day, anytime anything crashes, you see about it on Facebook. So it's pretty cool. And they also do anniversaries of major crashes. But the point being, you asked me about safety, and I think you can't really speak, accurately about safety without analyzing what causes accidents. And you have to have an attitude of, being endlessly curious about accidents and about what causes them, and read the accident reports and think about that in relation to your own flying. And have you ever put yourself in a situation like that? I think every pilot should do that. And it's the best way to become safety aware and safety conscious. So my advice to a glider pilot, a solo student, say, would be keep your energy up when you're anywhere near the ground, your kinetic energy, right? When you're anywhere within 100 feet of the ground, or even 500 feet of the ground, or even 1,000 feet of the ground, keep your energy up. Because most pilots that are killed in glider accidents are killed in stall spins at a low altitude, which comes from flying too slowly close to the ground and having a stall that you don't have the altitude to recover from. And that's what, the airplane pancakes into the ground. So that's what kills pilots. And to avoid that, you keep your energy up. It's better to land in the trees with little energy than it is to pancake into the ground. Right.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Right. So if you have a choice, to sustain your flight, you got to be very mindful of keeping your energy up. So that's my only advice.
That's some great advice. I greatly appreciate that. And it's definitely a good idea to keep in mind. Like they say, too low, too slow. So keep that energy up. You don't have to worry about that. And we definitely can learn from all the accidents. If it's horrible when someone loses their life to an aviation accident, but if we can take some good out of it and learn from it and save some other lives, then something good came out of it.
Amen.
David, thank you for joining me tonight. It's been very, very, you had some very cool stories, especially the West. I enjoy hearing stories about the East too, but the West seems like, I'd have to get out there for sure. And
if you go west, this year I went to Moriarty, New Mexico, and it was killer. And particularly the thing that not only is it amazing weather and terrain and just a beautiful place to fly, super strong weather, but the facility itself, Moriarty Airport, is uniquely friendly to glider pilots with a 7-day-a-week commercial operation, providing tows, maintenance facilities, at least 3 different glider mechanics. It's the best facilities of this type that I've seen anywhere in the United States in terms of supporting a glider operation, a commercial glider operation. So in season, I think that soaring can't be beat. And if you want to go, stick your toe in the water, Moriarty is a great place to go.
Oh, very cool. Have quite a few places to check out. California, New Mexico, Utah. Yeah, there's some good areas I've heard some great stories from. Well, David, thanks again. I appreciate you taking your time to be on the podcast.
Thank you, Chuck.
And thank you for joining us for another great guest here on Soaring the Sky. If you haven't checked out the other episodes on Soaring the Sky, you can do so at soaringthesky.com. There's also pictures of our guest on there. And while you're online, don't forget to check out the SSA, ssa.org. Lots of great information, even a place where you can find out where you can take your first glider ride, as well as webinars and lots of other great information there at ssa.org. If you're on social media, Instagram, you can find us, Soaring the Sky Podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Soaring the Sky Podcast. If you're a pilot and you have some stories you'd like to share with us, I'd love to hear from you. That's Chuck at soaringthesky.com. Sit down and talk to you here on the podcast. If you just want to say hi, let me know where you're listening from, where you're enjoying the podcast. Also love to hear from you, Chuck at soaringthesky.com. I hope you join us back here next week on Soaring the Sky.